What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch here, back with another NFL Top 10. Thank you guys for watching and supporting my NFL Top 10, specifically the top 10 NFL defenses of all time and the top 10 NFL offenses of all time. Thank you guys for watching those. If you have not already watched those, go check them out and come back here and watch this video, because today we are going to talk about the top 10 NFL defensive players there has ever been, of all time, the best NFL players of all time. And I put a lot of effort into this list, as I do every single list, and the criteria is basically based off of how dominant they were at their position, their accolades, their success, and how much of an impact they made on the game on their defensive side of the ball. It's very easy to talk about offensive players, but a lot of defensive positions don't get a lot of credit, and a lot of their credit doesn't really show up in stats. So it's a lot harder to make a defensive list than it is an offensive list. All right, guys, let's get into the list. We start off with number 10, Alan Page of the Minnesota Vikings Purple People Eaters defense. He was the Purple People Eaters anchor, the defensive tackle for the Minnesota Vikings Purple People Eaters defense. He also played for the Chicago Bears. He is the first ever NFL defensive player to win the NFL MVP, and he is only one of two guys on the defensive side of the football to win the MVP. That alone could put you at number 10, right? Well, he also won two Defensive Player of the Year awards, one in 71, the same year he won the MVP, and one also in 1973. He went to 9 Pro Bowls. He was a 6-time All-Pro and a 3-time second-team All-Pro. He played 218 consecutive games, which I believe is the record for the most consecutive games for a non-quarterback, which is pretty insane. This guy was an Iron Man. He was an NFL champion in 1969, the year where they won the NFL championship. They went to the Super Bowl and did not win the game. They lost to the Kansas City Chiefs that year. He was the first D player to ever win MVP, and that is the biggest thing you got to say about Alan Page. He put defensive players on the map in terms of changing the game, having a huge impact on the game, having one player on the defensive side of the ball that could possibly be the best player on your team. So Alan Page definitely deserves to be number 10 on this list. His stats look something like this. He has an unofficial sack total because he played before sacks were actually a stat. So he has 148.5 sacks unofficially. That is still pretty ridiculous. If that was an official stat, that would rank right up there with the all-time sack leaders. You also got to figure that he's a defensive interior lineman. He's not a defensive end, and he played in an era where there was a lot of running the football. So this guy was racking up seasons with, 18 sacks and 76. Those type of seasons with a ridiculous sack totals. He also had a lot of fumble recoveries and forced fumbles. He had 23 fumble recoveries in his career. He had an unofficial total of 28 blocked field goals, which is absolutely ridiculous. There are some players that only get, 1 or 2 blocked field goals. But in that day where it was a little bit easier to block some field goals, Alan Page was the best at it, blocking 28. And he also had 3 safeties throughout his career, which is the second most of all time. So Alan Page has all the numbers. He played on a great team and a great defense. Purple People Eaters actually made my top 10 defenses of all time. So check that list out once again. And Alan Page was the biggest reason why. So he is on this list at number 10. Let's move on to number 9. We have Ronnie Lott. Ronnie Lott is, in my opinion, the greatest safety ever to play pro football. He is the hardest hitting hitter in NFL history, and he played for the San Francisco 49ers, the Oakland Raiders, the New York Jets, and the Kansas City Chiefs. He played a lot of places, but where he's most known is, of course, the San Francisco 49ers, where he won 4 Super Bowl championships with Joe Montana and Walsh there in San Francisco. He was a 10-time Pro Bowler. He won 8 first-team All-Pros. He played both cornerback and safety, and he was one of the only players to play corner and safety and make it to the Pro Bowl for both positions. He was a 2-time interception leader in the NFL, which is pretty great for a safety. He had 1,146 tackles, 63 interceptions, 16 forced fumbles, and 5 touchdowns throughout his career. Ronnie Lott pretty much did it all. Not only was he one of the most feared players in his time in mostly the 80s, but he was also a Super Bowl champion, a great leader. There's that story of him playing basically without a finger. He's one of the toughest players ever to play not only safety, but any position in the NFL. Again, great leader of that San Francisco 49ers team, defense in general, and he made that team on defense what it was. There were a lot of great players on that defense, but he was definitely the best of them all. And those stats basically speak for themselves. He was great against the run, great against the pass. He could play corner, he could play safety. Ronnie Lott could pretty much do it all, and he's definitely one of the greatest defensive players of all time. I have him here at number 9. We then go to number 8, the all-time sack leader. The leader in sacks all-time is Bruce Smith. Bruce Smith played for the Buffalo Bills, the Washington Redskins, mostly the Buffalo Bills, where he racked up 200 sacks in his career. 200 sacks, that is the all-time leader in sacks. He had 1,225 tackles, 43 forced fumbles, 2 interceptions, and he played 13 of his 19 seasons. Not only was he had a long career, he had a lot of longevity throughout his career. He played 19 seasons, but in 13 of those 19 seasons, he had 10 sacks every single year. So he was a very consistent pass rusher. He put up a lot of sacks, obviously. He's the all-time leader. 11 Pro Bowls, very consistent, great player throughout his career. 9-time first-team All-Pro. A 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, which is the record tied with Lawrence Taylor and J.J. Watt. And he was a 2-time second-team All-Pro, so when he wasn't a first-team All-Pro, he was almost a second-team All-Pro every year. 4-time AFC Defensive Player of the Year, and of course, the big one, he has the most sacks in NFL history. Just that alone, with so many great players that played at both outside linebacker, defensive end, defensive tackle. You got to give Bruce Smith his credit and his due. He might have not been the most intimidating player. He might have not been the most talented player, but he was a great pass rusher. He was very consistent. He had a lot of longevity to his career. He was on a lot of great teams that came up short, and maybe if he won a couple of Super Bowls, he would have been even higher on this list. But the thing with Bruce Smith is maybe he gets overshadowed by a couple of the pass rushers that were also in his day, which kind of sucks for him. But to have 200 sacks to your name is pretty ridiculous, and you got to rank Bruce Smith in the top 10. He comes in at number 8. Let's go to the greatest cornerback that ever played pro football. His name is Deion Sanders. Deion Primetime Sanders, the creator of the term shutdown cornerback, played for the Dallas Cowboys, the San Francisco 49ers, the Atlanta Falcons, and the Baltimore Ravens. He's a 2-time Super Bowl champion. He's an 8-time Pro Bowler. He's an 8-time first-team All-Pro. He's a Defensive Player of the Year in 1994. And he's one of 2 players to score 6 different ways: punt return, kick return, receiving touchdown, rushing touchdown, fumble recovery, and I can't remember the other one. But Deion Sanders was absolutely insane. One of the greatest athletes to play in the NFL, in pro sports. He was one of the fastest players in the NFL. He had one of the fastest 40-yard dashes of all time. He played baseball. He was a great, great athlete. Just a amazing guy to watch. Shutdown corner. He made the term known. There were players that wanted to play receiver, but then they watched Deion Sanders play, and they switched to play cornerback because of how cool Deion Sanders was. He put the position of cornerback on the map, not only for the players, but for the fans watching the sport. He had 513 tackles, 53 interceptions, 10 forced fumbles, and get this, he had 5,722 receiving yards. He also played receiver in his day with Dallas. He had 22 touchdowns, which includes punt returns, kick returns, and receiving. And Deion Sanders basically could do it all. Again, a phenomenal athlete, the greatest cornerback ever to play, and took out completely one whole side of the field. When you played against Deion Sanders, Jerry Rice was getting shut down. Michael Irvin was getting shut down. Chris Carter was getting shut down. Any receiver of that era, name the best of them, and Deion Sanders shut him down. So you got to give Deion Sanders his credit as the best cornerback of all time, one of the best athletes ever to play football. He comes in at number 7 on my list. We then move on to number 6. Number 6 is Mean Joe Greene. You had to have a player of the Steel Curtain on this list. The best player of the Steel Curtain, in my opinion, Mean Joe Greene of the Pittsburgh Steelers, was a 4-time Super Bowl champion, a 1-time Great Coke commercial man. I'm just kidding. But, he had four Super Bowls, 10 Pro Bowls, 6-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time second-team All-Pro, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year, Defensive Rookie of the Year in 1969. He played 181 games. His statistics are widely unknown. I did a lot of research on this, and it was very hard to find his statistics because, again, this was in an era where sacks weren't recorded, tackles were barely recorded. It was basically only fumble recoveries and interceptions at that point. But he was the best player of that Steelers defense. He's a huge reason why they won 4 Super Bowls. He won 2 Defensive Player of the Years, which basically no one has done. He's probably the best interior defensive lineman in NFL history. He was very, very influential to a lot of players to come through the ranks of the NFL after him as an interior defensive lineman. Not only could he stop the run, but he could also rush the passer. He was a ridiculous athlete for his size, a very intimidating force, and the name Mean Joe Greene it's not just a name for no reason. The guy really was mean, and Joe Greene definitely deserves to be on this list at number 6 as the greatest interior defensive lineman ever to play in the NFL. At number 5, we have Deacon Jones. Now, a lot of you might not know who Deacon Jones is. It depends how schooled you are in the art of football and the past and the history of football. But Deacon Jones played for the LA Rams, the San Diego Chargers, and the Washington Redskins. He played, he was basically the man that created the sack. He named the sack the sack. So this guy must have been good, right? Well, not only did he name the term, but look at these numbers from 64 to 69. You could consider Deacon Jones to be the greatest pass rusher of all time from these numbers. Of course, these are unofficial statistics because in the 60s, the 70s, they didn't really have sack numbers. So 22 sacks, 19 sacks, 18 sacks, 21 and a half sacks, and 22 sacks. That is a ridiculous amount of sacks in 5 years. I said sacks a lot in that sentence, but Deacon Jones, that's just how many sacks the guy had. He named the word sack. He invented the sack. He revolutionized the position, the way that you play defensive end, the way that you got your jump off the line. He even got a rule because he had this move of his called the head slap, where he'd slap a guy's ear and turn that corner quicker than he was so quick around the edge. And the reason why they made this rule is because he was getting so many sacks and terrorizing offenses and slowing down the offensive production for a lot of offenses around the league. So they had to slow this guy down, but it didn't really matter. He was still putting up huge sack totals, sack after sack after sack, year after year after year. And Deacon Jones, man, ridiculous career. 8 Pro Bowls, 3-time second-team All-Pro, 5-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. He reportedly accumulated over his career 173 and a half sacks, which were in, 12, 14 game seasons back then. In 67, he had 21 and a half sacks in 14 games and 22 the following year. Deacon Jones could be considered the greatest pass rusher in NFL history, and for terming the name sack, you just have to put this guy in the top 5. Deacon Jones, for all his ability and his impact on the game of football, is number 5 on my NFL defensive players list. Now let's get into the top 4. We have Dick Butkus at number 4. Dick Butkus played for, of course, the Chicago Bears, and he was the middle linebacker. 119 games played in his career. 22 interceptions, 27 fumble recoveries, and of course, we don't really have the statistics for sacks and forced fumbles, but apparently he had probably one of the highest forced fumble counts in NFL history if it was actually counted. And I'm sure he did because he was one of the most intimidating players, maybe the most intimidating player ever to play defense. Dick Butkus, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, 6-time First Team All-Pro, 2-time Second Team All-Pro, 8-time Pro Bowler. Like I said, over 1,000 tackles. Didn't play a very long career by today's standards for a great middle linebacker, but was just so intimidating, so much of a force, and in such a little span of time put such an impact on the way that the game was played in terms of a middle linebacker. Before him, there was never really a phenomenal middle linebacker. There were great defensive ends, great defensive tackles, great linemen, but there was never a great linebacker, and Dick Butkus stood really above the rest in terms of linebacker play. He was able to rush the passer, able to hit like nobody else, force fumbles, make plays, get interceptions. Whatever was asked, Dick Butkus was basically a one-man wrecking crew at middle linebacker, and he definitely deserves to be in the top 4 as the second best middle linebacker in NFL history. We move on to, in my opinion, the best middle linebacker in NFL history, the best modern NFL, in terms of modern, I mean 2000 and up, middle linebacker and defensive player of all time. That is Ray Lewis. Ray Lewis, of course, spent his entire career in Baltimore as a Raven, and this guy really accomplished a lot. He was a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, a 3-time AFC Defensive Player of the Year, a 2-time Super Bowl champion, actually being named a Super Bowl MVP in the year 2000, a 13-time Pro Bowler, which is the record amount for his position, 7-time First Team All-Pro, 3-time Second Team All-Pro. He played 228 games, had 67 pass deflections, over 2,000 tackles, 41.5 sacks, 31 interceptions, 3 touchdowns, and 17 forced fumbles. He was the heart and soul of Baltimore's defense that in 2000 was arguably the best of all time. Also had great defenses in 08, 09, 05. Almost every year that Ray Lewis was on that defense was in the top 5 for every statistic. The greatest leader on the defensive side of the football I've ever seen, and definitely deserves his place in the top 3 NFL defensive players of all time. He also had a huge impact in terms of fans loving defensive players because of his passion for the game, because for his love for football, and because of his crazy charisma that he had, that entrance coming onto the field, his little dance that he had, providing something on the defensive side of the ball that many didn't do before him. Really, he was a star on the defensive side of the ball, which not many have been. Ray Lewis is number 3 on my NFL defensive players in NFL history. At number 2, we have the Minister of Defense, Reggie White. Reggie White played for 3 teams during his career, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Green Bay Packers primarily. He also played for the Carolina Panthers. He was Defensive Player of the Year twice, 3-time NFC Defensive Player of the Year, a 2-time NFL sack leader, a 13-time Pro Bowler, a 10-time First Team All-Pro, also a 3-time Second Team All-Pro, a Super Bowl champion with Green Bay. He played 232 games. He had 198 sacks, which was the record until Bruce Smith broke it, 33 forced fumbles, 1,112 tackles, and 3 touchdowns. Reggie White played a lot less games than Bruce Smith did. He was a lot more dominant in his time. And, with those Eagles defenses, he had one of the greatest defenses with the Eagles, with the Packers, and made a huge force. He was a one-man wrecking crew at the defensive side. On the defensive end position, he was the greatest there has ever been. Of all time, the greatest defensive end. He was not only phenomenal in terms of pass rushing, but he was the best run stuffer in the entire league as well. 2-time Defensive Player of the Year speaks for itself. He was the Minister of Defense for a reason, a beloved football player as both an Eagle and a Packer, one of the most respected players there's ever been in the NFL, a Super Bowl champion, a true winner, a true leader, A great guy, and put up all the statistics that you need for a great NFL player. He's the minister of defense, and he comes in at number 2 on my top 10 defensive players in NFL history. And now it's time for number 1. Were we really expecting anybody else? It's LT. It's Lawrence Taylor, the New York Giant outside linebacker, the defensive player that flipped the game on its head. This guy played 184 games, had 142 sacks, 1,088 tackles, 9 interceptions. He was a member of the Big Blue Wrecking Crew, 2 of the greatest defenses of all time, coached by Parcells and Belichick. 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, which was a record for a long time until J.J. Watt just tied it. 2-time Super Bowl champion in 86 and 90. He was an MVP in 1986, the second MVP on the defensive side of the ball. He was the true best player in the NFL for a number of years there, Lawrence Taylor was, and he was widely regarded as even, the best player of all time when he played. He led the league in sacks 1 time. He was a 10-time Pro Bowler. He was a 10-time All-Pro. He was a 2-time NFC Defensive Player of the Year in 83 and 86. He's credited with changing pass rushing schemes, offensive line play, and formations. The way that you had to attack and scheme on defense totally changed. Lawrence Taylor basically invented the outside linebacker position. There weren't really a lot of outside linebacker greats like him. The ability to pass rush like a defensive end, but also the ability to drop back like a middle linebacker in coverage. Lawrence Taylor was just a ridiculous specimen. Nobody in the NFL had seen anything like him before him. Offensive lines had to double him. They had to have, a back block, a tight end block, 2 offensive linemen block him. It was ridiculous. You couldn't stop this guy. He was the biggest weapon in NFL history on the defensive side of the football, and that is the biggest compliment you can have for a defensive player. He had double-digit sacks from 1984 to 1990, where he just terrorized the league. Lawrence Taylor changed the game, invented basically the 3-4 outside linebacker, changed what offenses had to do to scheme against him, changed the way defenses played and drafted, and that is the reason why he's the greatest defensive player in NFL history. So I hope you guys enjoyed my list. I have Lawrence Taylor number 1, Reggie White number 2, Ray Lewis number 3, Dick Butkus number 4, Deacon Jones number 5, Mean Joe Greene number 6, Deion Sanders number 7, Bruce Smith number 8, Ronnie Lott number 9, and Alan Page number 10. All of these guys I thought had the most accolades, the most dominance, and had, the biggest impact on the game of football on the defensive side. It was a very difficult list to make. There was a lot of players in contention. There was a lot from Ed Reed to Rod Woodson to Jack Lambert to Dick Lane to Derrick Thomas, Bob Lilly, J.J. Watt, Randy White, Night Train Lane, Jack Ham. The list goes on and on and on. But these 10 guys, in my opinion, with their accolades and with their impact, stood out above the rest. So I hope you guys enjoyed this list. Comment below your opinion on my top 10, what your top 10 is. Do you have any issues with my list? Would you rank anyone higher than the other person? Do you think I got it spot on? Let me know. It's Mitch of The Bottom Line View. Thank you guys for watching. Subscribe to the channel for more NFL top 10s just like this, and peace out.